So we're going to continue with our second panel. It's going to be on case studies, lessons learned, and practical application of developing models of conflict resolution. The moderator for this panel is going to be Maria Volpe, my former professor, professor of sociology, director of dispute resolution program, and director of the CUNY Dispute Resolution Center of John Jay College, my alma mater, City University of New York. Can you come announce your name?
Thank you very much. I am Venerable Oyineye Isaac Olukayode from Nigeria.
School of Arts and Social Sciences, Thai and Solarian College of Education from Nigeria. So don't blame me. We presenting on the prospects for peace and security in multi-ethnic and religious societies, a case study of the old Oyo Empire in Nigeria. And last, we have Sheikh Abdul Mumin Salifu. I think I got that one right. Zongo Chief and President and current Regional Chief Imam, Center for Islamic Research and Studies, and Council of Imams and Ulamas of Northern Region of Ghana, and will be presenting on Muslim peacebuilding in Africa and the Balkan context, on challenges and needs.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be here with several of my students who've been interns at ICERM this past year. Thank you, Basil, for putting this together. This is truly a magnificent day here where we have an opportunity to explore an area that is often not examined very carefully by those in the conflict resolution field. We stay away from the identity-based kinds of conflicts because they're often so intractable and difficult and challenging and daunting and all of that. This panel, I think, may not have our... Do we have our third speaker? I think we have only two speakers, so we may catch up on time here. Context is really important. We've heard that all day, and we're going to hear that more from our speakers here this afternoon, that there is no cookie-cutter approach. There are no magical formulas and no easy solutions. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about some of the efforts that have worked in other parts of the world. So we're going to begin with Sana, and welcome.
Hello, good afternoon. Really glad to be here with you all and to be able to take part in this first annual conference and hopefully first of many. The presentation I'm making today is partly from experiences, has built upon research I've done over this past summer in Myanmar, and some of the interviews and people I've spoken with, their voices will be in this presentation. But before going into it, I do want to say that I think one of the traps that research always falls into is, as does media and everyone else, generalizing the overall voices that are in the overall conflict. And when I use terms like Myanmar government, Muslim, Buddhist, and present what the views are in this conflict, I don't mean to generalize the overall body of Buddhists and Muslims being the same way. They're not. That's what my experiences in Myanmar have taught me. There are many, many different kinds of people in the country that are doing many different things. So this is my research question. How does the discourse of securitization used by the Myanmar government impact the human security of the Rohingya Muslims in the Rakhine state of Myanmar? And I've using human security as a framework of looking at the overall conflict and pulling out how securitization of the Rohingya has been affected in terms of their access to resources and access to livelihood. So this map overall gives you an idea of what area I'm looking at. The first map over there shows you most of the different ethnic groups and how they're spread out over the country in terms of their states. And then this map over here shows you the Arakan state where the Rohingya are. Just as a note, most of the ethnic groups on that map are in the process of ceasefire negotiations with the government. All of them have been in a state of conflict with the government since the military government came into power. And many of them are of different religious groups, such as Christians and Muslims, and some of them are Buddhists as well. Sorry, this is a lot of information, so I'm just going to skim over most of it. I got carried away. So one of the really important parts of this conflict that isn't really coming out in the media when you hear about what's happening with the Muslims and Buddhists in Myanmar is the colonial roots and how the British impacted the conflict, how it is part of the conflict today. When the British came in power, one of the things they wanted to do was to not just remove the monarchy, but also remove the power that Buddhism had within the country. The monarchy gained legitimacy, political legitimacy, through Buddhism and through Buddhist monks who were senior advisors to most of the kings. The kings were seen as having good karma, and because they had good karma, they had the responsibility to improve the people's karma. And so if there was a coup, or if another king came into power, overthrew the current king, that meant that usurper had better karma than the king. So Buddhism was always connected politically to the monarchy and how it played a role in Myanmar. It isn't something new in terms of the agency it has in politics and in being political in Myanmar today. And that's kind of always overlooked. And the way Buddhism plays a role in South Asia is much different than many people perceive. It's historically had a role in being political. So some of the things that the British did was, besides changing the hierarchy of the Sangha, the monkhood, they also changed the education system. Education in Myanmar at that time, which was known as Burma, I should point that out, was given through monasteries, and monks were the teachers. And so when the British came in, they introduced a secular curriculum, which in part also forced the Burmese to learn English, but also put out the people that had already had a Buddhist education, traditional education. Those people couldn't find jobs anymore based on the way that the British had implemented the education system and the requirements they had for the new positions, the new job market that they introduced. So the changing around of the system, and also introducing ethnic groups into, they elevated the ranks of ethnic groups. They didn't trust the Burmans, they didn't trust the Buddhists because of their connections to the monarchy, so they instead decided to elevate the Kachin, the Karen, and other ethnic groups around the countries into the roles in the military, such as generals, into administrative positions, and political positions. So they were trying to place people in power that they trusted, and they inadvertently ended up making the ground fertile for Buddhist nationalism, at the same time creating many tensions with the ethnic groups that have been part of the reason that they've been in conflict since the independence. Conflict background. So the specific paper that I wrote for this conference is focusing on the Rohingya, and they're in the northern Rakhine state. I'm also looking at Muslims in Myanmar, and it's important to note that the Rohingya, compared to the rest of the Muslims, have a very different are are playing different roles in this conflict. The Rohingya have been stateless since the 1982 Citizenship Act. They're no longer considered a legitimate ethnic group within Myanmar. Whereas the other Muslims in Myanmar are part of different ethnic groups that are considered legitimate, and also, but at the same time, are feeling discriminated against, are being targeted by discrimination in terms of policies that prevent them from getting licenses to marry, or preventing them from getting identification cards that prevent them from getting a degree after college. So at the same time, some of the Muslims are part of ethnic groups that are struggling with the government and are having ceasefire negotiations, such as the Kachin state, which is predominantly Christian, but have also Muslims, part of the Kachin Independent Army, who's been in a conflict with the Myanmar government. So it kind of shows how ethnic identity versus religious identity might be playing a role in different parts of the country. The Myanmar government and military are playing different roles within the conflict in terms of passing policies, increasing the securitization of the Rohingya. Media is playing a really big role, especially since 2012 when the country was opened up and introduced Wi-Fi. Facebook is a really big part of the problem in terms of how hate speech is currently being spread. And they're struggling because they don't know how to deal with hate speech. They don't know how to deal with social media. And they're looking into ways to navigate this new type of communication style. And then there's an extremist group, the 969 movement, which started in the early 1990s, and they have been connected with the communal violence that happens within the country, and also with the discrimination that's been happening, boycotting Muslim businesses, and also pushing forward the law that's currently being discussed within the government, banning interfaith marriages between Muslims and people of other faith. One of the things I noticed when I was in Myanmar was that there were many different people, many different couples that were of different faiths. So I'd met a Buddhist man that was married to a Muslim woman, and that's something basically that this law is trying to prevent from happening, to keep Buddhism pure. And one of the things that I'm trying not to do with this 969 movement when it comes to explaining and talking about them is saying that they're Buddhist. And I'm trying to not do that because of the way that the conversation in the media has been happening, has been basically introducing this extremist group in many ways that Islam has been discussed in the media, as in the U.S. and other places, where people can't separate Islam from terrorism. They talk about Islamic terrorists. So the media is doing the same thing here. They're saying Buddhist terrorism, Buddhist terrorists. And that's part of the whole problem when it comes to this conflict. Some of the nuances of the conflict. So besides just the ethnic, religious tensions that are playing a role in this conflict, some of the other things that I found are playing pretty significant roles are the upcoming elections in 2015. Since 2012, Aung San Suu Kyi has been freed from house arrest, so she can go around the country, and she's helping her party, the National League for Democracy campaign. They have a pretty large Muslim voting base, especially within the Arakan state where the Rohingya are. And part of the reason people say that Aung San Suu Kyi hasn't said anything when it comes to what's happening to the Rohingya is because of the party being painted as Muslim sympathizers because they have such a large Muslim base. So some of the communal violence, such as what's happening in Mandalay, has been connected to the fact that when NLD is coming in to campaign and talk about what their platform is, the Mandalay riots happened right before a big campaign, the NLD campaign came. So there's been those nuances of the politics. Everyone's pretty high-strung about what's going to happen in 2015 with the elections, especially in terms of the fact that the current government is very much the leaders of the military junta that just transferred over into this government structure. And people are doubting the fact that they're going to be relinquishing power via democratic election. And so it's going to be something that people are really interested in seeing what happens with this and what happens with the ceasefire negotiations after the elections. One of the other nuances that was playing a role is natural resources and development. There's a lot of influx of international development organizations and resource organizations coming in because they have oil and gas and minerals and things that haven't been excavated from Myanmar that's up for grabs. And we already talked about the ceasefire negotiations. Why human security? So UNDP uses a framework of human security as a way for its projects, for its organization. And basically that framework says that the state gains legitimacy through the people within the state. And then inadvertently it becomes the state's responsibility to protect the people. So then that clause of the responsibility to protect comes into play, which states up there, you can see the definition, that the primary responsibility for protecting populations from genocide, war crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing, and their incitement. That's just one of the three pillars of the responsibility to protect clause within the UN and that the UNDP endorses. So by giving the state the power to protect its people, it's giving them the power to give them the services that they need to have a livelihood and survive. By rendering the Rohingya stateless, the Myanmar government has effectively made them outsiders. And by making them outsiders, they've made them be perceived as a threat, as illegal immigrants. And by doing that, they can claim that they're violating Myanmar sovereignty, and they can basically push them out, put them in IDP camps, internally displaced camps, and do other things because they're stateless and considered outsiders. So that's one of the things. When you see pictures in the media, you'll see monks and other people protesting against the UN because they're perceiving international development organizations right now, such as the UN, as stepping on their sovereignty as a country and as Burmese. Go to the next one. So I've already mentioned that the Citizenship Act of 1982 has rendered the Rohingya stateless. That's basically 800,000 people without citizenship and access to resources. Many of them are still in Myanmar in IDP camps, which Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times said he likened them to quasi-concentration camps because of the fact that they can't access resources, they can't get jobs, they can't get education, they can't leave the camps without a travel permit, which they can't get approved, or if they do get approved, it comes with a hefty bribe. They have to get permits for marriage. If they don't get a permit for marriage and get married anyways, they can be put in jail. And they usually are put in jail. They are not allowed to they're not allowed to have the professions of engineering. They're not allowed to have a profession in medicine. They're not allowed to have a profession in education. They're only allowed 2 children. If they have more than 2 children, then they usually have to hide them with other family members or send them across to Thailand where family members are living in refugee camps. They have food insecurities. They don't have access to food. That's been one of the big problems that the UN found when they went there this summer. And they don't have access to medical care, really. the medical care that's given in the camps are usually by people that are not well trained. And yeah. So some of the things that, those are some of the things that I found in through my interviews. I also interviewed people within Yangon, the Muslim community within Yangon, which included a university group, a university Muslim group, the 59th Street Mosque of Yangon, and other different mosques around the city. One of the questions I asked in the interviews that I did was about interfaith approaches and if they have confidence in interfaith dialogue or the way interfaith approaches engage their community. Some of them had mixed perceptions of what interfaith dialogue and interfaith events were doing in the country. I think interfaith approaches in the country are working in places like Mandalay, where they hadn't really seen any communal violence for the last 150 years until this year. And one of the things that was different from the rest of the country when it came to communal violence was Mandalay is the only place where they actually had an investigation and found perpetrators of the violence, the source of the violence, which was basically a woman was bribed to say that 2 Muslim men had raped her. And that led to the Buddhist community within a part of Mandalay rioting against the Muslim neighborhood that left many dead. By finding this woman and getting deeper into the conflict, they realized that there's more playing a role than just the Buddhist Muslim identities. They're still looking for people that bribed the woman. But the interesting part of that whole investigation was that the Buddhist leaders within Mandalay, the Muslim leaders and Christian leaders came together and really pushed hard for this investigation. So it wasn't just the Muslim community asking for an investigation, it was also their partners that they had been working in interfaith dialogue with and activism coming together for that purpose. Some of the things that people left me with in terms of their frustrations with interfaith dialogue in Myanmar, especially in Yangon and Mandalay, was that usually the conversations, the dialogues that are happening are always at a top level where leaders are always engaging each other. They're always having pictures at events, and they, grassroots level, think it's more of a publicity stunt than really any type of interfaith engagement. The other part of the problem was the lack of interfaith dialogue is always attractive to moderates, to people that are wanting to engage the other. That's one of the elements of interfaith dialogue most of the time. But how do you build, one of the questions they posed was, how do you build empathy within the extremists or within the people that are actually discriminating and believe in the fact that Muslims are terrorists or they're bad and the Rohingya are illegal immigrants? How do you get them to the conversation, and how do you engage in empathy building? And then the other part of it was the last element, conflict transformation. A lot of the conflict resolution approaches that are being taken in Myanmar are being introduced by outside organizations and often miss the social context. And the way the approaches are being conducted are, they perceive the conflict as a bad thing, which, yeah, it can be a bad thing, but the negativity of it, they're only directing, looking at that instead of looking within the social context and going from that and trying to transform it. So these are some of the suggestions that came out of the interviews that I did. Yeah, I'm sorry, that was just skimming through a lot.
Thank you, Sana, for sharing with us an incredibly complex process of how the others created and what some of the challenges are at the local level. Isaac, we'd love to hear from you next.
Thank you.